My name is Ayumi. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and you're listening to Sparkleside Chats with Magical Girl Ayu. Hello, my magical friends. I hope you're having a great week so far and you enjoyed your weekend. For anyone celebrating the holidays, whether they were the ones that just finished or ones coming up, I hope you enjoy them. Just a quick reminder that this is the second to last episode before we take a break in January. If you haven't listened to previous episodes, I would recommend you check them out in that free time to catch up. Our first episode back will be on February 2nd. I'm really looking forward to next year's podcasts as we already have 2 episodes ready for next year, and I'm hoping to record a bunch more during that break. Yeah, just try to relax a little bit and have some me time as well. So I know that this year in general has been really rough, but I really am thankful for everyone who has been supporting me by listening to this podcast. It's been really fun so far, and I'm really excited for even more to come. Where shall we start? So, there hasn't been any Magical Girl news this week, and checking the box office, unfortunately, our Magical Girl films here in Japan are not doing so great either. I still have not gone to see the Magical Doremi movie. It's really unfortunate because I really did want to see it in the theater, but the numbers here in this third wave of the coronavirus are just really, really bad, so I just can't take that risk. Anyway, let's talk about what I've been watching in the past 2 weeks. So, just in case you didn't listen to last week's episode, I kind of skipped over what I was watching and reading just because last week's episode was so very long. So, there is a little bit of stuff to catch up on. So, I've been watching a lot of stuff in preparation for future episodes, but also trying to kind of expand my own knowledge of magical girls. So, I am still reading Futari wa Precure, the novel, and just kind of chugging along a little bit every day. I also bought a lot of books and comics, so let me talk about those a little bit. I believe I have managed to get my hands on every single Pretty Cure novel, which is very exciting. Most of them are a junior high school level, I believe, except for the Go Princess novel, which I think is more for a younger audience, especially considering where I found it in the bookstore. I think it's a younger audience. And I also bought a lot of comics, so I managed to buy all of the Japanese comics for Kirara Princess, which is the Disney Magical Girl series. I tend to relate it to Kingdom Hearts. I kind of think of it as like Kingdom Hearts if it was a Magical Girl series. So this comic was also translated into English, but for some reason, there is a continuation that is happening as of, I believe, last year, though I'm not entirely sure because publication could have been affected by the pandemic and so on, but it looks like there is a continuation of this comic starting, or that has started already, in English only, which is pretty rare, but it is a story of the main character Kirara with Mulan, who, to be honest, is not really a popular Disney character in Japan, so I kind of get it, but still I hope that, especially since the live-action Mulan movie was released this year, that will help to get more interest in it. Basically, because it's a Chinese story, I think most Japanese people don't even know that it exists, so people who know about Disney's Mulan in Japan are basically just all the Disnerds. So there's that, and there are 2 novels as well of Kirara Princess, which I also was able to get. And by the way, I'm just getting everything like super used on sale, which is why I could get on my hands on so many. I also got the first, I believe, 6 books in the Magical Girl Raising Project light novel series. So, of course, that extends way past the canon of the animated series, which I will be continuing to watch in the future to discuss on a future episode. I do have an episode guest lined up for that topic, so that's going to be pretty exciting. I think that's it for magical girl stories now, but there are definitely a lot of books. And unfortunately, I know most of them have not been translated, or I'm kind of not really aware of these sort of thing, but I believe there might be fan translations of some novels, but I really don't know where that is. I just think it's really interesting for my own sake, but I would also love to talk about them. If any other people can read Japanese and are reading those books, I would love to hear about it because there actually are a lot of magical girl novels that have never been adapted into comics or animated series. So going into what I have been watching, I rewatched all of the original Madoka Magica series. I have not watched Magia Record yet, but I will probably be getting into that soon enough because that's actually a little bit more accessible for me. Madoka I had to rent at the store, but I can watch Magia Record on Amazon Prime Video, so that's easier for me. I continued to watch Sugar Sugar Rune, and that one is more for me. But if you are interested in talking about it, I would love to hear from someone because that is one of my favorite series, and it's one of those that I never finished, so I'm really looking forward to actually going all the way through with it. I watched only one episode of Star versus the Forces of Evil, which is available here for me on Disney Plus, so I'm watching it there. It was really funny. I was kind of surprised, I guess. I don't really know what I expected, but it's really, really enjoyable, so I'm really looking forward to continuing that, and that will be a future episode. There's certainly debate about whether it qualifies as a magical girl series, but for me it counts, and I think for me it's not even like debatable, but yeah, I'll get into that when we talk about that in a future episode. And let's see, also, Healing Good Precure is what I've also been watching in Precure. I guess I haven't talked about the last few episodes, but they've all been pretty fillery anyway. Yeah, oh, actually, as of this recording, I still have to finish watching the latest episode. I think I was about halfway through, but I had to stop during my lunch break, which is when I usually watch it. So I will have to get back on that. So I guess that's all I have for what I've been watching. So we can move right along into today's topic. So today is another creator episode. This is actually from one of the first callouts I had asking for people who are making Magical Girl series. So this was like very early on before the podcast actually launched that I had put this call out for artists. At first I had been thinking just to talk to artists in general. I didn't realize there would be so many that I would have to make it like a monthly thing. But I'm really glad that I did because it's been one of my favorite things to talk about magical girls with people who are creating magical girls. So this one's actually very interesting and kind of educational for me. I think this talk really breaks down the whole world of publishing in a way in the US that I wasn't really aware of, but makes sense when hearing about it from someone who has been trying to create series. Today we talked with Mary Bellamy, who is also known as Zorilita online. And she has been around for a while, as she'll get into, and she has made several Magical Girl projects. So she has three. One is Ah Heck, then there's Faux Facts, and the last is Cosmic Cupcake Chaos. These are all in different iterations, and you will hear more about that in detail. But it was really, really interesting to hear someone who honestly has just been trying so hard to make these things a reality in a way that is a little bit different from previous guests. So, yeah, I really hope that you enjoyed this chat with Mary Bellamy.
Once upon a time, there was a land ruled by a beautiful lady named Lady Lovelocks and her magical friends, the Pixie Tales.
So, today I'm here with a magical girl creator. Can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mary Bellamy, otherwise known as Zorilita, and I go by she and her.
Great. And you are a creator of several magical girls. But before we talk about those, can you please tell me your history with the magical girl genre?
So, I grew up as a child of the 80s. Many of the prevalent cartoons for girls always featured a magical element. Lady Lovelocks had a magical animal that lived with the girls and they could dye their hair. Gem sort of had this magical transformation with Synergy. The Charmkins, Strawberry Shortcake, Rose Petal Plays, they all had these sort of lines that were all about girls that were magical or lived in magical environments, or at least they were heavily implied.
Mhm.
So, in the 90s, anime just started to creep into the United States a lot more blatantly. It was kind of subtle with the little bits and David the Gnome and stuff, but
Mhm.
it really started to come out, and I discovered it through like video game magazines. And they used to have this anime corner, and I saw Sailor Moon. And I thought, wow, this is really cool because it's like girls that are fighting and they're not just like, oh, I need a boyfriend. I need, to be a princess and stuff, but they were actually fighting. And I got super invested in trying to find out more information. Now, this was back in the early days of the internet, so there wasn't a lot you could really find. So I don't know if you know Hitoshi Doi.
Kind of, yeah.
He's got a website which is still like surprisingly still up, and it led me down this magical girl rabbit hole. So I discovered all these other series like Nerd's Angel Eureka, Saint Tail, Wedding Peach, and a whole ton of other ones. And I then went on a quest because I live out in Los Angeles, and so we have an area, Little Tokyo,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of Japanese like stores and shops and bookshops and videotapes and stuff. So that was my first introduction to Tankobon. And while I had no idea how to read it, I loved the art. So I would grab as many art books as I could find. And
Mm,
there was lots of shojo stuff. And it was really appealing because it was like cutesy, but it was also like magical girls and like fighter stuff. It was
mm.
just something that you didn't see in America. So I would grab like everything I could grab. And they did have these videotape stores, but it turns out like a lot of them were just like tapes of stuff off a TV in Japan, like stuff off of laser discs.
Yeah.
So I would be watching these anime and I would have like no idea what they were saying, like Sugoyo ne and like little catchphrases, and you could remember those, but the rest of it was kind of a mystery. So that led me to finding fan subs. And this was
Mm,
back in the old days where you actually had to go order a videotape that was like copied off a laserdisc, and somebody would actually sit there and code translated text over it,
yeah.
and people would trade them on the internet.
Mhm, mhm.
So that's how I found like VKLL and Techno Girls. So that like Sailor Moon, I finally got to see the later seasons of Sailor Moon because in America it kind of got censored, and then they kind of just dropped it off until later. The anime block on Cartoon Network, Tsunami, I think it was, until they finally got later seasons. And then, of course, Stars never made it to America until I think just a few years ago now.
Yeah, yeah.
But I got really into finding magical girl stuff because it was just so different. So like I liked the serious stuff from anything from Sailor Moon to silly adult parodies like Puni Puni Poemi.
Mhm.
So that's how I found it, and what I really liked about it, I wanted to inject all those things into the stuff that I do. I loved magical transformations, the costumes, the mascots, the girl power type of ideas. I even pitched a few of my series to animation studios, but unfortunately, this was a little too soon and the timing wasn't right.
Mm,
Later, you'd see magical girl stories come out like Witch and Winx Club and Lolly Rock and all those things. So it was just kind of not the right timing. But honestly, you get more freedom being able to tell your own stories than going through a studio that has all these rules and statutes that you can and can't do. I mean, there's even a difference between broadcast TV and streaming.
mhm.
So I put all those things into my own work, and I ended up going to San Diego Comic Con after being published by a bunch of little publishers. I even prototyped my own magical girl characters, wands and brooches, and I even had a toy line that won Sci-Fi's third coolest indie toy at Comic Con in 2018.
That's really cool.
Thanks. So that's my brief history with magical girls.
Yeah, well, that's a lot, but that's pretty cool. So let's talk a little bit about your 3 different Magical Girl series. So which one came first?
Well, they all kind of came out around the same time, or at least proto versions.
Mhm.
So, Aw Heck was the first one that I got the gumption to. Like, I had a story idea. And in the early 90s, there was nowhere to put that. So if you didn't have a publisher, you had nowhere to go. There were no web comics back in the 90s, save for JPEGs maybe uploaded to your website.
Yeah.
And nobody's gonna look at that, and unless you were, like, super rich, you weren't printing even black and white copies of your stuff. So, I did a short 10-page story. I tried to get it pitched to a company called Radio Comics after I discovered they had anthology books, which is basically a book that has a theme and you can submit stories to it.
Mhm.
And it was the very first time I drew the story. Went all the way to San Diego Comic-Con, and I went to Radio Comics and I got my first rejection, which was kind of a bummer, but you gotta start somewhere.
Mhm.
I ended up getting dragged to another convention, and another company called Shanda Fantasy Arts, they picked it up and published it in an anthology, so that was pretty cool. Around this time, while I'm waiting for things to go through, I started my other series, Faux Facts, which ended up being a series of short stories that were just kind of based on funny things that happened to me, but like exaggerated. So those went in, and I submitted it back to Radio Comics, who had another book called Manga File. And they're like, cool, we like it. So they started publishing those, and another series I had called Project Lamb. And meanwhile, I'm kind of overlay all my stuff. Aw heck, I decided to redraw the story that I had drawn before, and I submitted it to the Tokyo Pop Rising Stars of Manga contest. And I ended up
Mm.
being one of the finalists until the very last minute.
Wow.
And I got bumped for a turkey dinner story. So I was kind of like, well, I guess they already had ferrets. They didn't need evil bunnies. So I ended up getting it published again by Radio Comics. It was supposed to be in their 25th issue of Manga File, but Diamond kind of pulled the plug on the book, so it ended up in furlough.
Mm.
So, right at that point, I've got two different stories, and I don't know if you were aware of manga in America, but around this time, Tokyo Pop was trying to get original animated anime manga stories.
Yeah, yeah.
Del Rey was trying them. Like everybody suddenly decided they wanted these indie books, and so I created a pitch called Cosmic Cupcake Chaos. And that one's about a girl who wants to be a baker, but the world is invaded by sentient baked goods, and it puts her out of business. And with the help of a disgruntled pet from the aliens, she becomes a magical girl and wants to strike back and at least get a job doing something like fighting and saving the world.
Mm.
So that one was a short pitch to the Del Rey program and Tokyo Pop, I do believe. Neither one picked it up, so I retooled it to make it an animated short for the Nicktoons contest. And I got really good feedback from it, but unfortunately, they only have so many slots, and they'd already had a Cupcake Bad Guy show that they were in development with, so it didn't go anywhere.
Oh.
Another company had seen me talking about how my Aw Heck was rejected from their company, and they're like, "Oh, I never saw it. Can you put another pitch together? So we want you to work on another book." And so I said, well, I have Cosmic Cupcake, and I had an editor, and unfortunately, some places they wanted to change so many things that it was not like my story anymore at all.
Mm.
And then the guy quit. So I was like, well, okay, what do I do? That company had another book called Mangazine. I was able to get at least a chunk of it into there so I could get paid back for it, and it just kind of sat dormant after that point. I started to retool it, and I realized I'm probably just gonna turn it into a novel,
Okay.
like an actual book rather than a comic, because I love me some comics, but, when each book takes 2 to 4 months to do 50 full color pages, you kinda like, "I'm getting burned out."
Yeah, yeah.
Meanwhile, Ahek and Fofax are both going strong. At San Diego Comic-Con in 2008, somebody let me squat at their table, and they go, "You should totally get your own table and you should do your own books." So I did a full book for Faux Facts, which was the proto book for her. And I ended up redoing it and adding a little more content for my own table. And then I also did Ah Heck. So those both they were at my first table in 2009. And subsequently, each year, I would do another volume of at least one of the books.
Mm.
So, Faux Facts now stands at, it's 10 books now, and
Wow.
will probably end up at 11, so, almost 550 pages. And Ahek ended up being about 280 something pages.
Mm.
So, that's where they pretty much came from. Do you want me to tell you what they're about, or
Yeah. Yeah, so you kind of mentioned what Cosmic Cupcake Chaos is about, and I know that you said Fofax and Ahek are a little connected. You have some Ahek online, so I read a little bit of that, and I found it very interesting. I like your art style a lot.
Thank you.
So they are connected, right? Kind of.
Yes, all my universes, I have a wink or a nod or a direct connection to them.
Mm-hmm.
So in Faux Facts, Ahek and Cosmic Cupcake are books and TV shows. So they're fictional works in that universe. But there are characters in Faux Facts that are different versions of characters that are in Ahek.
Oh, okay.
So Lilith in Faux Facts is Heck from Ahek, and Lucifer appears in both, but they're not the same version of the character. So like Faux Facts is more kid friendly, and Ahek's a little older,
Right.
but you recognize the faces and designs. So they kind of walk in between the worlds
Hmm.
in that way.
Sounds fun.
Oh, thanks.
So yeah, let's talk about Ahek first then. So what would you say Ahek is about primarily?
Ahek is a story about a girl who winds up in the underworld, and she's not good or evil, but she winds up in the underworld and she gets tricked into signing a contract that says she has to work off her bad karma. And we, as the viewer, know that she has to also learn a lesson that she hadn't learned in life. Now, up until this point where she enters into the program, it's been a complete failure. All the other girls have failed, but Angel is basically a catalyst to wake up all the other girls. So she's tasked with the job of cleaning up after these evil demon bunnies who are destroying everything.
Hmm.
Only she starts to do the job and decides, you know what? This can't be it. This can't be all of it. I got to escape. I got to find a way out of here and get back to being alive. And so she ends up turning all heck upside down, which ends up waking up some of the other characters. And she finds out later that the whole thing was God, a woman trying to save borderline souls. So
Oh.
basically, it's her journey trying to get redemption and God's version of trying to reform souls that just needed that push to believe in themselves instead of giving up entirely on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I put a lot of the magical girl essence into it because between each world that Angel goes to, she transforms into a different design.
Hmm.
Like when she's in Oliver's world, she's got the bunny ears, she's in the maid costume, she's got a magic wand that helps her do her job. All the characters have a magical item.
Yeah, yeah.
And so when she jumps into Heck's world, she turns into more like a cartoon toy.
Mm-hmm.
She's like a doll version of herself. And when she goes to Leanna's world, she's like a succubus, you know, the wings and the devil tail and the little ears and horns and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then, from there on, she gets a different outfit wherever she goes or a different ability, which I kind of liked from the whole card captor Sakura, and
Mm.
corrector Yui kind of vibe. It's fun as a
Yeah,
design
yeah,
element.
definitely.
It ended up having a sequel after Angel's story that tells you what happened to Chastity, Faith, and Hope, how they got there, what happened to them after the program fell apart, and a little extra info. And I just got pulled into a Kickstarter that has stories about like what did commandments mean, and it wraps up one of the stories of Faith that was in Ahek.
Hmm. I listened to one of your other interviews recently where you were talking more about Ahek in relation to your own faith, and I found it to be very interesting.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you.
In my case, I wasn't raised with any God exactly. So my father is an atheist and my mother is a Buddhist, so I didn't have that kind of aspect to my own life. So I find it very interesting to talk to other people who have those sorts of religious beliefs and see how that affects especially affecting their relationship to something like magical girls and fantasy as a genre, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. No, it totally does because it's like for me it was just like always part of your life. God has a role for you, God has a place for you, and God can change anything and make anything happen. Transformation is just a huge part of Christianity. You transform from being one type of person to another and you transform from one life to another. And early Christianity did used to believe in reincarnation, which I still believe in,
Hmm.
and I wanted to incorporate those kind of things into my story because I know that most people see it as an Eastern concept, but the earliest roots of Judaism and Christianity did also believe in reincarnation. So I thought it just really lends itself to anime and to magical girls in that way.
Yeah, makes sense. Interesting. Yeah. So then let's talk a little bit about what Faux Facts is about.
So, Fofax is about a group of friends. They're lovable oddballs. They kind of stick out in school. And a former friend accidentally, well, she intentionally releases a magical entity that starts running chaos around the town and flipping everything upside down. And the girls are unfortunately unwittingly pulled into it. And they have to find a way to save their town, save the area, and fix everything before it gets basically the apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
And, their former friend Tiger Lily, while she is an antagonist, was kind of unwittingly duped into it. And so there's stories of like her realizing maybe she was wrong and maybe they were manipulating her. A lot of the characters, they all have very different paths in their story arcs. Like characters are being pulled apart not only by the chaos that's going on with the monsters and the creatures, but also like real life is pulling them in different directions. So they're trying to save the town and keep their lives, held together. But in the real world, you can't always keep your friendships. People grow, people change.
Mm-hmm.
Some friendships are good and some are toxic. And I got a little turned off by everything always being, hey, if we're friends, then we'll always be friends. Like something I work on is My Little Pony, which is very friendship fixes everything, but that's a nice message for younger kids, but in the real world, it doesn't always work that way. So, one of the characters is Lilac, and she's actually a magical girl, like a full on magical guardian. And because of the chaos being unleashed, she has to go on a journey into a book and train to be stronger so that she can end up fighting this magical entity and getting rid of it. There's a little bit of a confusion as to who this entity really is, and by the end, it's revealed to have something more to do with Lucifer than it does with Chaos Entity.
Hmm.
So she has to end up teaming up with a former kind of frenemy. Like there was a couple of girls that got tricked by the magical creature into becoming pseudo magical girls. One of them ends up getting redeemed and having to partner up with Lilac. And so we'll get to a point where there's going to be a huge confrontation and then things are going to happen and resolve in a certain way. And I don't really want to spoil it, but it's just going to be a little open ended, but mostly clean up all the stories. And then there's also this ironic side plot of one of the girls ends up becoming a fake magical girl for a TV show. So it's kind of like you've got the magic of television, and then the real thing is actually happening in their town. And she's actually relieved that she's no longer dealing with that. She would rather be a magical cartoon character, hero, TV show person than an actual person having to fight a real enemy.
Hmm.
So that was kind of like the little duality of the show or the series.
I see. So that sounds very interesting. Definitely a little bit more comical and kid friendly, as you said, than Ahek, but still sounds not completely unrelated, of course. Was there anything else about Cosmic Cupcake Chaos other than what you had already mentioned?
Well, I realized after the fact, and this is a thing that happens after you go to Hollywood or you go to have pitches, that ironically the name doesn't really represent the series anymore and it's going to get renamed.
Okay,
It was more of a title of how she got her powers than the actual thing. It's going to end up being kind of a buddy comedy kind of magical girl show. Like they were like heroes going around, heroes for hire kind of a thing. And it's just a way that sometimes you have an intention of starting something out as being a very literal magical girl thing. I was trying to be in that tiny shelf space, and then I realized, well, maybe it would work better as a thematic thing rather than a literal translation of that kind of genre.
I see. Of course, you mentioned a lot of magical girls that you got to consume, I guess, from your childhood up to now. So, which ones do you think, or what series do you think are your main influences in your own work?
Oh, wow. So, like, things from Sailor Moon to Wedding Peach to Shamanic Princess to Kamikaze Jean, Saint Tail, just like if it caught my eye, I get really obsessed and I would just buy everything. Like everything from Fushigi Yugi to Pretty R to D4 Princess, just everything was like an influence. I mean, ironically, the biggest influence for me was Sonic the Hedgehog. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Archie comics
Yeah,
at
yeah.
all. So there are two artists, Spaz and Harvo, and they had a very anime esque style, and a lot of it was kind of influenced by Ranma one half. So that was a huge thing. And before anime really was well known, a lot of, like I said, video game magazines had ads for games like Parodius, you know, the little bunny girl on a missile shooting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, anime art like that. And then, like, most people don't realize that a lot of cartoons in the 80s, they were animated in Japan. So while they were drawing American styles, you could still see the influence of the anime in the art that was used in the cartoon. So things even like Strawberry Shortcake, Rainbow Bright, especially the movie, Moon Dreamers, Lady Lovely Locks, even Ghostbusters had this pseudo anime esque kind of quality to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up, like, absorbing a lot of that. So, like, around the 90s, American animation started to change, and I got more into the anime stuff, literally, like, just literally Sailor Moon and trying to draw, like, things that existed, to the later 90s where I started to move away from trying to actually be anime, but be more inspired by it.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a lot of original English language manga, world manga, indie comics, things like Blue Monday and Hopeless Savages and things like that, that were kind of in this weird limbo between anime, between American style. And I kind of started to gravitate to those sorts of things where I would pull from things like, oh, I like the way they design hair. I
Mm-hmm.
like the way they design these little cute mascots. But I would try to combine all the things like that, all the Disney cartoons, all the video games, all the anime, all that stuff, and combined it all together.
Hmm.
So I'm kind of like a mishmash of a bunch of different things rather than any one specific like artist or such.
Yeah, yeah, of course. I think most people would say that they're that way. You take inspiration from what you like, it makes sense, and you like a lot of different things. Yeah, so we kind of got into a little bit, but who would you say is the target audience for these Magical Girl series?
Okay, so all my work is primarily targeted to women or girls. Faux Facts is a younger, it skews like maybe 6 and up. Adults can read it. There's like subtle jokes that adults would get that kids wouldn't get. Ah Heck, I would say is like 10 and up, like a middle grade kind of thing and going up. And then Cosmic Cupcake, it's pretty benign. I would just say that
Mm-hmm.
was like a 8 to 10, somewhere around there, but like anyone could read it. But most of my work is very female centric. And while I don't mind drawing pinup art, I like to draw tasteful stuff. So it really targets that demographic that wants to see a respectful view of women rather than the cheesecakey adult stuff. I don't really target that mature audience at all. Anyone can enjoy my stuff, but I really don't care to draw that sort of subject matter. So I keep it pretty PG-13 absolutely at the
Yeah, of
most.
course. And you mentioned that you have done some other stuff outside of the Magical Girl genre, so could you talk a little bit more about that?
I've worked in a lot of anthologies, like I'd mentioned. I'm kind of a hybrid. I'm an artist, a creator, and a writer, whereas some people are just artists or writers. So, one of my friends had a series of anthologies. MAOSS is Monsters and Other, I'll censor it, Scary Stuff. And that one is about what is a monster? What is a monster really? And I wanted to take something that was very unassuming and blow it up in a interesting way. So I used a cute style of art in a 2-page story where this flipping the page is the big reveal. We are introduced to 3 characters, a girl walking through an alley and 2 thugs, and we find out that while the thugs are quite scary, they aren't the real monsters.
Wow.
So I use this false sense of cutesy to lull you into security and then scare you with the thematic element of a
Mm-hmm.
monster that's shooting out snakes that are devouring bad guys. It's horror meets cute, kind of like a Junko Mizuno kind of thing. So I also did Cthulhu is hard to spell. It's I don't know if you know about Lovecraft or any of that kind of stuff. I like to take an all-powerful character and I like to break them. And I like to make them break them down into a basic mood or feeling. Like, so we all know that Cthulhu is a dark evil overlord and he's super powerful and omnipotent and such. But in my story, I took Lucifer from Ah Heck and I had him put a call out for all the gods to come together to fight so they could take over the universe and control everything. But he ends up oversleeping and gets left out. And so he's kind of like, oh no, I have no part in it. And Lucifer's like, yeah, you know what? Your name's too hard to spell anyway, so go away. And the sequel is Cthulhu Hard to Spell 2, The Terrible Twos. So in this volume, Cthulhu is quite depressed that he missed out on taking over the universe. He no longer has a place to live. So Lucifer's like, you know what? You're so pathetic. I'll give you a job. And so he takes him and sends him to one of his business places. He says, I want you to pitch something. So Cthulhu talks about a pitch about an original IP, turning them into toys. And the board's like, yeah, we're going to pass on that. And then they end up ripping him off. And he's like, dude, Lucifer promised me a job. And they're like, yeah, we got a job. And then you see him being a street salesman, having to peddle these toys on a street corner. So I kind of took this all powerful character and I just whipped him. And I turned him down, and he's this cute, chibi version of himself. All the characters are soft and round, and it's just kind of like a silly version of, hey, I took your
Mhm.
power away. I also have done stuff for licensed art, like for trading cards and sketch cards, kind of like baseball cards, but within the packs of pre-printed cards, some of them are original pieces of art. So I could draw an anime version of
Mm.
Summer from Rick and Morty. I could draw like characters like anything from Marvel or DC Comics, Star Wars, Adventure Time, and series like that. I've done thousands of those cards, and some of them are really cool, and they'll let you draw whatever you want. So I put an anime or cutesy influence to it, but others are very much no, no, it has to be on model. It's a licensed property. Like when I do My Little Pony, I've wound up with the people that approve it. They're like, no, 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 can you make it more on model? Can you change this? Can you change that? And you're like, okay, whatever. It's fine. You're the licensor. I just do what you pay me to do. In animation, like I touched on before, it's entirely different than comics and manga. You have to write your work in such a way that it's episodic. You have a limited amount of time to tell your story. There's no going to be One Piece with like 1,000 volumes. You have like 13 episodes to get your idea across. You've got standards and practices that'll say, no, no, this character can't fall in the water. A kid could copy that, so you can't do that. And sometimes they'll be like, well, you have to put something educational in this series. So you're stuck in there saying, okay, I have to talk about gravity for some reason. And the one drawback and the one change that's been really different between comics and magical girls and such is that in manga and anime, you are allowed to do longer, more overarching plots with your stories. But in America, more recently, the production costs have gotten so high that studios prefer to have more episodic and comedic stories. So you have to make a very, very simple version of your thing. And then you have to make it so that each episode can stand alone, that you didn't have to know what happened the week before. You can have some general overview, like, okay, in the beginning, the heroes, they set up their home, and towards the end, they achieve their goal. But you couldn't say have big battles that get referenced in the next episode because people wouldn't be able to follow along if it was aired out of order. But anime and comics, you can totally do that. So, like, for example, Cosmic Cupcake Chaos was set up in that the girl loses her job because of an invasion that causes her to choose to become a magical girl and try to hopefully get back to where she was. It's set up in such a way that you could have episodes with monsters fighting, and you wouldn't need to know who was there before, just monsters fighting. And it could be cute and it could be funny, and all you really have to do is write a pitch packet and have like a short proof of concept, like a little tiny animated thing. You don't have to write out everything for a pitch like that. Whereas if you're pitching a manga, you really have to say, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end, this is where I see the characters going. Now, I will say that television is slightly changing because of binge watching on, say, Netflix and Hulu. So some shows like The Dragon Prince and such have arcing plots, and that is allowed. But as of this point, I've not been able to get in there and pitch anything. I mean, I pitched at Disney, Nick, Cartoon Network, but I have not gotten into any of the streaming stuff yet.
Hmm. I see. Well, I do hope that you can in the future because you definitely have a lot of good ideas. I think that they would really go in well with an animation, I think. Yeah. And I mean, I know a lot of like the big stuff with Japanese animation has a lot of stories, but we do have other ones where you're you don't have to know what happened the week before to watch it and so on. So it does kind of depend. Yeah.
And
Mhm.
I think there are things like, Azumadango.
Azumanga Daioh?
Yeah, yeah, like, things like that are totally episodic, I think.
Mhm.
There are ones like you mentioned, but, like, when they bring stuff over here for TV, they're always trying to get the more action stuff, and then the American stuff is, like, exclusively like, "Nope, nope, just random. Let's have random humor." We're trying to pull it back to where like anime had, like, where you have the overarching plots, at least on, Netflix and that.
Yeah, it does seem like there are increasingly more and more of those shows, I think. I mean, Avatar: The Last Airbender was pretty big, I would say, and that definitely has a full story.
He was definitely, one of those exception to the rules, because as time went on, the networks got more and more hesitant. And his stuff was great, don't get me wrong, it's just the marketplace changed with the markets, the value of things went up, and there was, like, a quicker dollar to be had by, like, episodic things like Teen Titans. So,
Mhm. I see. So you mentioned, of course, that you have lots of different books and so on. So, how would people be able to read your works so far?
I have a web store, and unfortunately, it's for sale only in the US, but I am also on Amazon. It's print on demand, and so you could order, like, all of Faux and Ah Heck there, or you can order it from my website if you're in the United States. You can read a giant chunk of Ah Heck on my Tapas page. You can read it on my Tumblr. It's ahhecktheangelchronicles.tumblr.com. It's not the entire story, but it's up to the 3rd book. I do also have some things on my Patreon under Zorilita that you can see behind the scenes. People have commissioned me to do some stories that weren't told in the main books. I do also have various Kickstarters I'm a part of. I will always announce it up on my Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter, on my YouTube, Tumblr, I'm on Facebook, Instagram. Any of those places you can get a hold of me. Like I said, if you're in the US, you can buy from me directly. If not, you'd probably have to go through Amazon to find my stuff.
Yeah, and for international listeners, it is available. I just checked Amazon Japan and it is also there. So I believe any other Amazon should be able to order. Yeah, it looks pretty simple. So most of the listeners are in the US, but about, I want to say 40% are not. So for those listeners, they can use Amazon.
I can send smaller things overseas. Like I do have stickers, like I make limited runs of stickers. I do have enamel pins, but I'm going to think right now that shipping would be ridiculous.
Probably.
So have a friend send you a package of stuff rather than just one pin because they have increased shipping so much that it's like getting very hard to ship stuff in the US. So I don't want anyone to go into sticker shock.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. So yeah, so on your website, you're kind of all over the internet. So
Oh, and don't forget, I'm also at San Diego Comic Con every year. I'm in the small press
hmm,
section under Zorilita at small press table N4.
okay, great. So you're at the same table every year. That's pretty convenient.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I hope that there is a Comic Con next year. We'll see what happens. I
Yeah,
know
I know.
that's also it's a big place for a lot of small businesses and small artists. So I hope that it can come back. Yeah, but great. So I guess this means that we have reached our final question. So if you could be a magical person, what do you imagine you would look like?
Okay, so if you know me, I'm all about bunnies. Bunnies, everything. It's sort of my running gag. So I'm sure I would be some kind of bunny girl with ridiculously long, brightly colored hair and a ridiculous hairstyle that no one could ever achieve in cosplay. Over the top, big puffy dress, wings, probably bows. You could probably get a good feel for what it would look like if you looked at a lot of the costume designs in Ah Heck of all of the things that Angel can transform into. And even my
Mhm,
general art over on my DeviantArt page under Mary Bellamy, deviantart.com. Just anything bright, bouncy, funny, and way over the top.
I see. Great.
And of course, I'd have to have a mascot or 20.
Yes, yes, of course. I see. And do you think you know what kind of powers you would want to have?
Hmm. Well, I would probably use something that could make my drawings come to life
Ooh,
and save the day.
that sounds pretty interesting. That's definitely a kind of meta concept that. we could probably see more of. Great. So that's, I think, all we have for today. So, Mary, thank you very much for talking to me today about your comics.
And thanks for having me.
Yeah, they all sound very interesting, and I hope, yeah, especially in these times, especially, yeah, I hope that some of the listeners can check out your work and, yeah, buy some of your comics.
And did you want me to say my website, Earls?
You can repeat them if you want.
My website is marybellamy.com. My web store is zorilita.com. And you can find me on Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube, Patreon under Zorilita. And thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much. And I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thanks, you too.
Okay.
いつもトラブルばかりなの世紀末な二人ロミオとジュリエット本当に
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Sparkleside Chats with Magical Girl Ayu. Please subscribe, rate, and review if you like it. And don't forget to tell your friends about the show if you think they'd be interested. If you use social media, don't forget to use the hashtag SparkleSideChats. You can find the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at MagicalGirlIU, spelled AYU, and you can find me at IU She Knows, AYUSHEKNOWS. Show notes can be found on your platform of choice or at anchor.fm/sparkleside. Anchor is also where you can leave a short message if you want to talk about your favorite magical girl or ask a question related to the podcast. If you can support the podcast financially, you can buy me a coffee at ko-fi.com/IuSheKnows. Original podcast music is by Hazel. You can find her on Twitter at TwinkleParks. Thanks again for listening, and remember, you are magical.